that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Finnell. And Steve Reucroft, Dr. Steve Reucroft, who is joining us. And Dr. Steve Reucroft is one of those fellows at CERN who wrote the paper announcing the fact that the theory, should I say, that the Higgs boson had been discovered. And he's going to tell us about whatever he wants to tell us about. And what we do here, for those who don't know what's going on, I have a blog, geoharvey.wordpress.com, and for that blog I put up daily news. And the daily news is pertaining to energy and global warming, climate change if you prefer. And I post usually 10 to 15 items a day, and I see a lot of news go by, so I figured I'd put the best of it together for a show that Tom and I put on every week. And so we have 7 days worth of news to report to you, and we're going to start with that, and then we'll talk about other things.
I manipulate the cameras.
Yes, if Tom looks like he's deer in the headlights, it's because he's watching the monitors. And if Steve looks like a deer in the headlights, it's because he's partly deaf and can't hear what people are saying.
Stone deaf.
So if we sound like we're shouting, that's the reason. And if we sound like we're not shouting, it means that we're not doing the job that we're supposed to be doing, which is letting Steve hear.
And if you see me looking really puzzled, it means they're not shouting.
Okay. The first news item comes from Resilience. Sorry about that.
Ta-da.
Very bad joke.
Very bad joke. Very bad joke.
Global oil prices.
Never make fun of the disabled. Oh.
I would make fun of myself.
Yeah.
Oh, give it to the feeble-minded. Oh, dear.
Is that a disability, feeble-mindedness?
Mine, yes. Okay. Global oil prices, which at the current $90 to $110 per barrel are at historically high levels, are nevertheless too low to justify tackling ever more challenging geology. The earth is getting back at the oil companies. The industry needs an oil price of at least $120 a barrel to fund exploration in many places. And ladies and gentlemen, that means when you buy oil at the pump, $3.43 a gallon has got to go to the people who are pumping it out of the ground. That does not include the transportation through the pipelines by truck across the roads. It does not include taxes. It does not include the gas companies, refining, the rest of that stuff. It's just the crude oil, $3.43 a gallon. So guess what? I think that means oil prices are on their way up in the future. That from Resilience. From Hydrogen Fuel News, we hear that a team of scientists from the University of Florida developed electric cables that are augmented with nanotechnology, giving the cables the ability to transmit and store electricity in a single lightweight copper wire. Have you got a picture that you're going to?
I don't, and I remember reading that article and being very impressed by it.
Yeah, basically what they said is, if I get this right, is that the sheathing on the wire becomes a capacitor. Is that right?
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the growing capacitors on the wires. It's science fiction.
Mind-boggling.
This is really stuff I never could have imagined.
Yeah.
I was in a wire and cable business.
Yeah. You're an electrical engineer, right? Yeah.
So electrical
I should point out
big
here,
for me.
Steve has a doctorate in physics. Tom is an electrical engineer, which I think means that you have to have a license, doesn't it?
No, well, licenses are available, but it wasn't.
It was not required.
It wasn't a necessity.
But in order to do what you were doing, you needed to have a
In
degree.
order to do certain kinds of jobs that affect the public, you need a license.
Aha, and you were doing those?
No.
You were not, okay. He's not affecting the public, so you don't have to worry about it. For me, I'm also an engineer. I'm a computer engineer, which is basically a way of saying that I was self-taught. Okay, third item, the Chinese government, this is going back actually also to last Friday. The Chinese government has established ambitious targets of 5,000 megawatts of offshore wind power installed by 2015. That's a lot. And
It's coming quick.
30,000 megawatts by 2030. They are teaming with the British Embassy in Beijing to investigate ways a Chinese offshore wind plant could scale up quickly. Apparently there's somebody in the embassy who knows all about it. That from Clean Technica. From Economic Times, the Indian government is aggressively accelerating its solar energy program and aiming for 4 giant plants of 1,000 megawatts each. It also wants to bundle solar and conventional power to make renewable energy more affordable. Now, on Saturday, we got these. A team of scientists has calculated that for the low cost of $5, your house could be transformed into a smog-eating house that could eliminate polluting causing nitrogen oxides from getting into the air just by sitting there. This is done with a coating of $5 worth of titanium dioxide. And this is interesting to me. The article said that one house with a coating of titanium dioxide. Now I can explain why this particular thing is what it is. What they're saying is these 3, whatever they are, test samples have differing amounts of titanium dioxide on them. And that they all...
And it's not much. It's just a little
tiny bit. And they said it doesn't matter. Any amount is sufficient. Just a dusting coating like you see on the darker ones. But the amount of nitrogen oxides, NOx, that these things will take out of the air is equal to about 4 cars. And that is on a daily basis. And it happens, the way that it works is titanium dioxide is a very, very, very effective catalyst. And it will catalyze nitrogen and carbon compounds, which means not only does it take NOx out of the air, but it also takes alkanes. And alkanes, ladies and gentlemen, are things like propane, butane, methane, octane, all of those things, and other hydrocarbons as well. And so these things will take powerful global warming gases and convert them into nitrogen, which is almost 80% of the atmosphere, and it will convert them into carbon dioxide, which is less destructive by far than methane, and some of those other gases.
I'm surprised it's so cheap. You can't even get a can of paint for $5. And this is paint that you paint on the
Well,
tiles.
this is the white pigment.
This is white paint.
Pigment
yeah.
in the paint. You know what
But
they do with
the
titanium
pigment in
dioxide?
white paint is
Yeah.
TiO2 now, I think, isn't it?
That's right. Well, it could be zinc oxide.
So a can of paint costs about $50 now.
Yes,
so.
but most of that is
The oil, the vehicle.
oils, the can, the advertising, the executives will pay.
Yeah, well.
The titanium dioxide is used for other purposes as well, one of which is dusting donuts. Another is it's used in toothpaste.
Well, part of the good news is it's not nasty stuff.
Well, it's not nasty stuff, which is why
But
you can
it's in
dust
everything.
donuts. It's all over the place.
White,
And
if it's white, it's probably got titanium dioxide in it.
very likely. I mean,
The paper in your hand probably's got it.
it might. It actually might. And as a matter of fact, that would mean that the paper would be a very nice catalyst to remove these nasty things out of the atmosphere. And furthermore, titanium dioxide is extremely reflective. It's almost 95% as reflective as ice, which is, it means that it's approaching the reflectivity of a mirror.
So if it's the titanium dioxide that does the job, why doesn't just regular white house paint do the same thing?
Well, there's a problem, and the problem is the vehicle in the paint sequestrizes the the pigment, so it's not exposed to the atmosphere. You have to have titanium dioxide that's exposed to the atmosphere. Now, it is used as a coating on glass in order to make the glass what they call self-cleaning.
Yeah.
So the thing that I'm kind of thinking here is that siding will at some point start having titanium dioxide deposited on it, so that the house becomes self-cleaning. But the other thing too is, you know, we were talking earlier about solar power and how we really don't know what the effect is going to be on the atmosphere. And one of the things that I think may have happening in the future is that we may be saying, well, we need a certain amount of titanium dioxide on our rooftops, on our siding and so forth, in order to reflect so much solar power into space. And there are a lot of things there's a lot. This is an extremely complex equation, but I think at some point in the next millennium, if we survive, we may have that figured out.
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay, on the next day, oh, I'm sorry, that was the next day. That was the 7th. That was Saturday. And that came from Clean Technica. From Reuters, we hear this. Europe's power, gas, and coal markets are in a sharp down from their highs. Power and coal futures are down by around 40% since peaking after the Fukushima disaster in 2011 pushed prices up. Solar and wind power have added generating capacity while demand has fallen. And that's really not surprising when you consider that both solar and wind have been pushed by governments, and the demand is related to efficiency, and the governments have been pushing efficiency. The next item from Clean Technica, Tokyo Electric Power Company started building a big underground cooler meant to freeze the soil into a rectangular ice wall around TEPCO's 4 non-functioning but highly radioactive reactors to keep groundwater from leaking through. Steve, what do you think about that?
What do I think about that?
They're going to build a wall of ice around.
I know, I read about that,
There it
yeah.
is up there.
Yeah.
Isn't that impressive?
Yeah.
It's a monument to man's imagination.
Man's ingenuity using a wall. It's sad. One thing I never understood is why do they put nuclear reactors so close to dangerous places, if you can put it that way? Why do they put them on the coast and on the banks of rivers where they'll do the most damage if there is an
Because
incident? Water.
for every watt of power they're putting onto the electric lines, they're putting 2 out into heat that has to be distributed.
Yeah, so it's water, and that's of course what I assumed, but I mean, I would have thought there are better ways of getting water to a nuclear power station.
Well,
you know, the one in Massachusetts is in Plymouth in a prime location, and if there ever is a tidal incident, again, it's going to be zapped. And the one you've got here in Vermont, in Vernon, is on the banks of the Connecticut River. It's the craziest place to put a nuclear reactor, in my opinion.
Rivers. They're all on water.
well,
And they're all like
there's
that.
I think
And
there's
even the
one-
coal burning plants are on water.
yeah, for the same
This
reason.
is for the same reason. It's
Yeah.
cooling.
Yeah,
They
but
need
there,
the
there are
cooling.
other ways of cooling things. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it was the least expensive option when they were
Well,
built.
I think you're
at
right.
Fukushima, they had a situation where they had a big bluff, and they said, okay, we're going to build the plant here.
Yeah.
What are we going to do with all this stuff? Because it's between the plant and the ocean, and it's going to get in the way of the pipes. So what they did was they took all of that away, which was about 30 meters tall, as I recall. I might be wrong. It might have been 10 meters tall or something. But they took all of that away, and then they built a seawall that was 5.7 meters tall.
Yeah.
That did not stop the
Wasn't
14
enough.
meter.
Yeah, wasn't enough.
And you know,
Well, you know, we live and learn. We live and learn.
do we?
Well, we're building barriers now, or they are in Japan, and
No, they're building it because they have to.
a big barrier.
They
Yeah,
don't
they've
have
got
a choice.
they haven't got much choice now.
They're out of choices.
That's-
Yep.
they're out of choices,
what's
yeah.
And
going on.
that's one of the problems with nuclear reactors, is that when they go bad, you're out of choices. Anyway,
Anyway,
that next on Sunday the 8th, we have the average fuel economy for new vehicles in the United States hit a record high in May of 25.6 miles per gallon, a 0.4 mile per gallon increase from April. Vehicle fuel efficiency has increased 5.5 miles per gallon since October of 2007, when the Institute began monitoring fuel economy. I've got to say, I really think this is, it's nice that it's going up. This is not enough. 25.6 miles per gallon? We should be able to do much better than that.
Yeah, but that's an American gallon, don't forget.
Oh, I see, okay. Yeah, we'd get 25.8 if we were imperial gallons.
No, a UK gallon is 20% or 25% bigger than a US gallon.
Yes, is
That's
it?
why everybody thinks cars get better mileage in the UK than you do in the States, because we've got different units, different gallons.
I thought
Well,
we
they
had
do.
different liters.
I rented a car. I rented a car in Ireland last
And it
year.
did 20 miles to the gallon.
Well, it's priced by the liter over there.
Oh, well, that makes it very confusing. It used to be by the
We
gallon.
converted. We were getting 65 miles to the gallon on a diesel.
Were you really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We filled the car up once in 2 weeks, I think.
Well, you see, that's what you get for.
But you know
driving
what's
diesel.
happening now is the politicians in some states are getting nervous that they're not getting enough revenue from tax on gas. And so they're looking for new ways of taxing us. Why are we not surprised?
you've gotta do
Because they
is-
want to do damn fool things with the money.
Yes, of course.
And they want more money to do damn
How
fool
would
things
we
with.
ever get progress if politicians can't do damn full things?
The first thing we've got to do is get rid of all the politicians.
Oh, I think Bernie Sanders should be allowed to stay.
I'm trying to think of who was it that said that? Some famous
It
person.
was
in history.
Shakespeare who said first thing we've got to
Was
do
it
is get rid of kill all the lawyers.
Okay.
But that's a very similar statement since most politicians are
Laughing because
lawyers
somebody
anyway.
said we should kill people.
But all they're interested in, as far as I can see, is getting money to do daft
Damn
things
fool
with.
things.
And if they're not getting enough revenue because we make ourselves more efficient, they have to find other ways, other creative ways of getting
Absolutely,
money.
Absolutely.
It's incredibly annoying.
Yeah, it is annoying. But I don't think they're all bad. As I said, I think Bernie Sanders is great.
They're not all bad, you say?
They're not all bad. I was talking
Okay.
with the guy who was talking about there wasn't a good politician in Washington, and I said, I think there's at least one. And he was in Washington. He wasn't from Vermont. And he said, you might be right. Bernie might be okay.
He's one of the few politicians in Congress that is not a millionaire.
Yeah, and that's easy to believe.
That says something.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I think the trouble is one good politician is kind of swamped in an ocean of mediocre ones.
I'm
'cause-
not so sure because Bernie is pretty forceful. But we have to get on. We can't talk about politics on this.
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have not been talking about politics. What we're talking about here is science.
Everything's connected, you know.
I know. Okay. On the 8th, which I guess was Sunday, this was also on the 8th. That fuel economy piece was from the Energy Collective. Now this comes from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Already the #1 wind power state, Texas is on pace to increase wind capacity by about 70% within 2 years. Between that and new natural gas capacity, several energy analysts predict Texas will meet its EPI proposed goal of cutting CO2 emissions by 39% by 2030. And that's possible, but I don't think they're going to get helped by natural gas. And we'll go into that some other time. That was on the 8th, and now on the 9th, we have this. Analysis by the Rocky Mountain Institute found the U.S. could transition to a 2050 economy energized by triple efficiency and 75% renewables for a $5 trillion savings while supporting a 158% bigger U.S. economy, slashing carbon emissions by 82 to 86%. And when I read that, that was in Clean Technica, but it was originally in the Rocky Mountain Institute blog. I went to the Rocky Mountain Institute blog and I said, I think you're wrong. And I told them why. Mm-hmm. And the reason I think they're wrong is because I think that they are underestimating the amount of solar energy that would go on the market. And really, I think we're at a tipping point now for two reasons. One of which is that the price of solar power is going very, very low. Mm-hmm. And the other is, as EVs come on the roads, with a smart grid, the EV batteries will be used for backup for solar, which will make solar power more valuable. But the second thing is, EV batteries last only for about 5 years before they have to be swapped out. And when they get swapped out,
They're still useful.
they're still useful. They've only used about a quarter to a third of their lifetime for utility on the grid or for home storage. And so we're going to be seeing, between cars that can be used on a smart grid and batteries that are leftovers from cars, we're going to be seeing a huge influx of batteries. Now, Elon Musk said that he wants to have these batteries for sale at well below $200 per kilowatt hour. And $200 per kilowatt hour is the point at which the whole grid is affected because battery storage is cheap. And I know that people are going to be saying, wait a minute, $200 a kilowatt hour? I'm buying electricity at 16 cents a kilowatt hour, and that's high. What is this?
I'm glad you're going to explain this one.
Yeah, what we're talking about here, ladies and gentlemen, is not the price of the water in the bottle. We're talking about the price of the bottle. We're talking about the price of the battery, not the electricity in the battery. When you go into a car part dealership and you buy a 100 amp hour 12 volt battery for your car, you're buying something that is going to store 1.2 kilowatt hours of electricity. And if that costs $100, it does. And it's not good for grid storage because it won't last well enough for grid storage. So you need a more expensive battery for grid storage. But nevertheless, what I'm expecting is that we're going to be seeing batteries, new batteries at below $200 a kilowatt hour, and used batteries probably at a quarter of that, which means the grid is going to be transformed utterly, very, very fast once this kicks in.
So as a kind of a measurement here, if a guy wants to buy some batteries for storage at home,
Yeah.
and there's a market out there for used car batteries, what's he going to be expecting to pay?
I honestly don't know, but I would think that he'd be able to get batteries that I think he'll be able to buy used car batteries, which are far better for this kind of thing than the lead acid batteries in the auto shops at about the same price. So, you know, that's my guess.
But right now they're going for $2 to $3 grand.
But the price is,
the price is going
what, 2 or 3 grand for how much storage? 48 kilowatt hours?
I don't know the number, but what's typically going in an electrical car?
I think they're about 40 to 48. The high priced Teslas, I think, have 80 kilowatt hours.
Okay.
And these things, I'm assuming 40 kilowatt hours. I would think that those things are going to be like something on the order of $500 for a used one.
That sort of makes sense.
You know, it's just a guess, but I think that when we get to that kind of cost level, things are going to be.
Well, it's going to mean that the average homeowner can afford to have a couple of them sit in his garage.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. Having said all that, the solar energy storage system, by the way, that one was from Clean Technica, and so is this. Solar energy storage system market in Germany is approaching a boom period, according to many market analysts, with a rapid uptick in sales likely as the technology enters wider use. The systems benefit both the consumer and the grid. And basically this is the market, except this is new batteries, and they're already turning into being a big seller in Germany. And I'm not altogether sure why that is. I know that the Germans have been going to renewable power very, very extensively, but I don't know why they feel that it's necessary for homeowners to have that backup. The grid in Germany, I think, is pretty reliable. Maybe they want to be off-grid. I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that one.
I know that there are people in Germany who have elected to go off-grid. In fact, there was a town that elected to go off-grid, where they just said, you're going to take our power from our wind turbines, or we'll use it all ourselves.
Yep.
And the utility said, well, use it yourself. So
We talked about that on the show.
Yeah. Next, from the Washington Times, the Obama administration proposed regulations for power plants would give a big boost to nuclear power as the industry faces an uncertain future with increasing retirements and declining prospects from aging reactors. And I'm not sure what to make about this because nuclear plants take so long to build that I think that we're going to go through a couple of economic cycles before any new plants that are coming online will actually make it online.
Well, if you read some of the stuff coming out of the financial sector, they're saying exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
They're not stressing this as being a good investment anymore.
Well, you know, and the nuclear industry is putting a lot of credence into the idea of small modular reactors, but the first ones to be tested won't be tested for another probably 8 years. So how are these things going to be able to compete on the market? We don't know what the market conditions are going to be like.
We don't even know. We don't even know.
Anyway, on the 10th, which was the day before yesterday, which I guess means Tuesday, a decision by parties to an obscure convention has huge implications for Europe's aging nuclear reactors. License extensions for nuclear reactors must follow EIAs, and that's an environmental impact assessment, which compare the potential impacts of those to those of such alternatives as wind, solar, and other renewables. This from the Ecologist. I'm not sure how they can compare nuclear reactors' possible environmental impacts with those of solar and wind. You know, before Steve, you and I were talking about the environmental impacts of solar and wind, and you know, it's almost impossible to say what they are.
Well, every device that produces energy is going to have an impact on the environment. You can't avoid it. They all have an impact.
That
Yeah.
is correct.
And calculating that impact is very, very difficult. For all devices, everything you can imagine has an impact.
And the impact is usually unimaginable.
Yeah.
I could give you an example of that.
Quite often.
Yeah. I did some extensive work looking at the impacts, reported impacts of wind power on and other energy sources on birds. It's very easy to imagine, you know, this thing going around whacking a bird, killing it. The thing that's not so easy to imagine is fossil fuels killing birds, or hydropower killing birds.
Mm-hmm.
But hydropower in Canada.
Maybe that kills the fishes.
Well, the hydropower actually, it turns out, kills more birds, about 10 times as many birds in Canada as.
Oh, does it really? Kills birds as well as fishes.
It does.
Well, ducks are birds, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and any bird that nests near the edge of water is going to be impacted by the rise and fall of that water.
Yeah.
And the trick to understanding that is hydropower is very big in Canada, and it has about 100 times as much output as wind, but it kills 10 times as many birds. So if they were equal, hydropower would only kill 10% of the birds that wind power did.
Yeah.
But the big among energy sources, the big killers of birds are fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because of pollution.
Yeah. Sure.
So, and even nuclear, according to the Canadians, federal government has a bigger impact on birds than wind turbines.
How is that?
How we are.
I don't know. I tried to figure that out. I think it might be mine trailings, but it might be other things too.
Huh?
I'm just telling you what they said, and I did try to find that out, and I was.
Maybe it's because they put a nuclear reactor puts out a lot of unneeded, unnecessary, unwanted heat, and maybe that was
It
an impact.
absolutely could. I mean,
Yes.
I read a couple of years ago that they were trying to do an assessment of the number of fish killed by the Indian Point plant.
Yeah.
And the big question there was the industry right or was the state right?
Yeah.
The industry's estimate, as I recall, I might be wrong about this. I know the industry's estimate was 1/10 of what the state's was. But the question was it 100 million fish a year or was it 1 billion fish a year that nuclear plant was killing? And of course, the fish that it was killing were mostly so small, they were newly hatched fry that if you looked at them, they'd look like an eyelash with eyeballs. You know, they're very, very tiny animals.
Yeah.
Those.
But I don't think there's anything you can do about it. And we human beings are very fond of blaming everything else, I think. But in the end, it's us. It's the human beings that are having an impact on the environment.
I have news for you, Steve. Every fish that is hatched, every bird that's hatched is going to die of something.
I know. And if you're lucky, you'll eat it. But we have an impact on the environment. But we're also part of the environment.
That's
I mean,
true.
that's why everything
we
is
are
so
the
complicated. We
Yeah,
are.
that's
We are
right.
part.
That's right.
Human beings are kind of fond of pretending nature is somehow independent of human beings, but we are part of nature. We are natural creatures doing what we're, if you can call it designed to do. We're doing what we're supposed to do.
Well,
And we're messing up the environment. Of course we are.
well, we've got to figure out how to fit back into the environment the way our ancestors.
Well, you know my
did.
opinion. There are too many of us.
I know your opinion. I think
Far
that's
too
something
many
that
of us.
Most
Cut down
people-
by a factor of 100 and we'd be in better shape.
Yes, only
If this article you're referring to is the same one I'm thinking of,
yeah.
one big significant difference in this particular case is they want this environmental impact to be measured across national borders.
Yes.
It doesn't stop where the USA stops. If it's affecting Mexico.
That's
Well,
right.
this is in
we
Europe.
live on a sphere.
Yeah.
That's another very important thing to remember.
You know, that's an interesting statement. You know, we're on this big three-dimensional object that has this two-dimensional surface.
Right. We're living on
It's-
on the surface of a sphere.
And the surface is very, very thin.
Very, 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 very thin.
And what goes around comes around.
That's right. And the atmosphere is not all that thick.
No.
You know.
I thought that's what you meant by the surface.
Well, the surface is, you know, from the lowest
It's,
water. I guess.
we live in an amazingly fragile environment. It's amazing that it's so robust. And, you know, those two words should never go together,
Yeah,
but they do.
it's true. It reminds me of somebody many years ago who said that
Yeah.
human beings are very fragile creatures and easy to kill, but they're very he didn't say robust, but basically that's
Yeah.
what they're very resilient. Anyway, let's
Moving
see.
right along.
Moving right along. We read the thing. Oh yes, that's what it was. Also on Tuesday, at the Edison Electric Institute's National Convention, Warren Buffett was reminded by an aide. He actually asked the aide that Berkshire Hathaway had spent $15 billion on solar and wind power. He responded, "There's another $15 billion ready to go as far as I'm concerned." That in Business Week. Warren Buffett is investing heavily in
Yeah,
solar.
he's getting into it big time.
He's
He's getting into all kinds of energy big time.
well, he's not getting into
Coal.
not getting into coal.
Yep.
I don't know if he's getting into natural gas, but I don't think he's investing in nuclear. I don't know. That was from Business Week. Okay, San Francisco Business Times had an article on Tuesday saying the University of California president Janet Napolitano, was she the head of the EPA? She was in the cabinet.
I lose track of these people.
Yeah,
She
well-
had an important position.
Yeah.
I know that.
She was head of something.
She was head of something. Okay, something had Janet Napolitano formed an advisory group to help the UC system cut pollution. Now, this is the University of California. Do we know how many campuses that university has? This is UCLA, but it's
Yeah,
also
there's
a
a
bunch
lot.
of others.
There's
There's a lot of campuses.
They're all over the place.
They're all over California. I have no idea how many there are, but she wants them to cut pollution. Napolitano hopes that the University of California will reach carbon neutrality by 2025 by cutting some of its emissions and paying to offset the rest. And that paying to offset the rest part, you know, if you want to cut carbon emissions, you can just cut your carbon emissions by paying somebody else not to make power without carbon emissions.
Well,
I'm not sure that that's valid.
that's the cap and trade system.
Yeah.
And I always thought it was a scam.
Well,
But what I was missing was that the cap diminishes from year to year to year.
yeah. And, you
So
know,
what you're getting away with this year, you won't be able to get away with
which
next
is the reason why my power prices keep staying the same or going up, even though I'm buying cow power. I am buying cow power. I'm paying extra for
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
good for you.
Well, I want to stop that. I want to invest in one of those solar things.
You want goat power.
I want goat power. That's right. All right. On the 11th, which was yesterday, Japan's parliament on Wednesday, and of course they have Wednesday before we do, enacted legislation so we can report it after, you know, on the same day afterwards. enacted legislation that will allow the country to liberalize the household electric capacity that has been dominated by regional monopolies over the past 60 years. It's going to be interesting to see what happens out of this. It means that people are going to be allowed to choose their power providers, and I think from reading that they're going to be allowed to get them from other parties who may be solar farms or wind farms or tidal farms or whatever.
That's the way I read that, and that's the way we've been developing. That's been developing over here, but up until recently in Japan, that hasn't even been thought of.
Yeah, well, the Japanese have got a very orderly system, and the orderly system is kept orderly by 6 monopolies,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Okay, that from Global Post. VOXXI. How you pronounce that, I don't know. It might be Voxy, it might be VOXXI. According to Gina McCarthy, administrator of the EPA, numerous toxic chemicals found in Hispanic communities, largely from power plants, account for the differences in the number of Hispanic children who die from asthma compared to non-Hispanic whites.
This is in America.
This is in America.
Yep.
Now, I find this peculiar because this is going to be equally true, I would suspect, of black children and of white children who are living in less privileged
Yeah, economically
areas.
disadvantaged people are
Yeah.
living closer to
So
the
why
fuel.
did she say Hispanic instead of just saying disadvantaged
Who
people?
was she speaking to?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's the answer. I think
That may
is
be the answer. As a matter of fact, I believe she was speaking to a Hispanic
Yep,
group.
I think that's the exact.
Good point, Steve.
Because your point is very valid. It's the lower end of the economic spectrum that takes the abuse.
Well, we've been seeing that coming from the NAACP, same kind of thing. Coal burning plants affect black people more than they affect white people because black people are more likely to be in disadvantaged
Living
areas.
Yep.
Yeah. From Clean Technica, again, we have this on the 11th, yesterday. The first industrial scale municipal solid waste to biofuel facility will opened in Edmonton, Alberta on June 4th. Enerchem's waste to biofuels and chemicals facility will convert 100,000 tons of sorted municipal waste per year into biofuels and chemicals. Be interesting to know how much they're getting out of that in biofuels and chemicals. It's not going to be 100,000 tons because they're going to have waste. But what they're doing is they're taking municipal waste, sorted municipal waste, which means this is not human waste. This is paper, possibly, that is not going to be recycled. It could be other things. Food waste. Food waste is really a prime source for this. And they're converting it into fuels, biofuels, which means fuel oil, gasoline, methane for natural gas, that sort of thing. And that's 100,000 tons a year. They are saving a huge amount of money. We had a picture of a plant that was doing this kind of thing on last week. We were talking about waste mining.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're talking about the one in Edmonton.
Edmonton,
I
yes.
got it.
You got a picture of
I
it.
got it. I'll bring it up.
Okay. There it is. It looks like it looks like me. It looks like a refinery or some kind of, it actually is a refinery as I think about it. It looks like a chemical facility because it is a chemical
facility.
I used to work in chemical facilities, but they didn't look like that. They looked like old garages.
They're talking about being able, when it's in full capacity in 2016, they'll be able to divert 90% of its residential waste from the landfills.
Okay.
Into this.
Which means that instead of capping a landfill and catching the methane and using that to make electricity, they're doing something which is much more efficient. They're preventing the stuff from going into the landfill to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so the waste, and you know, there was a plant that was going up in London, which, as I recall, was going to cost something like 270 million pounds. The purpose of it was to convert all of the food waste from all of the restaurants and hotels into I had thought it was, I think it's methane. that they will use instead of natural gas. But you know, whenever you've got a facility that makes methane, you can use it for making something else.
You make all sorts of
Yeah,
stuff out of it.
I had an acquaintance once who was a organic chemist, and he said if you've got a molecule with carbon in it, and you don't want that molecule, but you want a different molecule that has carbon in it, there's always some path to go from one to the other. And it's just a matter of finding the path and how expensive is it going to do that. But carbon is an astonishing atom. And if you want to, Steve, you're rolling your eyes and shaking your head. What do you think?
No, I think one of the most encouraging things about our species, the human race, is that once we decide to solve a problem and we get our leaders behind the solution, and we always solve problems. I mean, we've done the most amazing things in my lifetime. You know, somebody decided we want to put men on the moon, so hey, we put men on the moon. We never put a woman on the moon, I don't think, but anyway, we put people on the moon. And when 50 years ago, we had a terrible problem with polluted harbours and polluted rivers and polluted lakes in the West. Sewage, human sewage. And we made a decision to solve that problem. And by golly, that problem is basically solved now.
I think of the Ashwillet River, which runs,
Right through Keene.
It runs through Keene and it goes down and meets the Connecticut River in Hinsdale. And that was the river that was closest to the house that I lived in when I was at a certain age in my youth.
Yeah.
And I remember that river being covered with soap suds. Not completely, but you couldn't go to that river without seeing soap suds around.
Yeah, I know.
And
I
the
agree.
river smelled like the bottom of an old washing machine. Because there was
some unmentionable place. I can remember the River Mersey in Liverpool when I was a student, not quite 50 years ago. I mean, it was so disgracefully polluted with human waste. You could actually identify specific articles of human waste without going into too much details because we're on TV. But it's amazing that in 50 short years, that problem is solved in the West.
Yes.
Now, I don't think the Yangtze River or the Brahmaputra, I don't think they're particularly clean, but
they're working on it.
They're working on it. And if there's a will, we can solve these problems. And I think there are other problems that we have now today, and if people just get behind the solution, but it can't just usually be the grassroots people. You really do need the political leaders to get involved too.
Well,
but once that happens, we are pretty close to being an unstoppable species. Very impressive, actually, I think.
Well, now we're finding out it's not just an expense. There's actually profit to be made by doing this stuff.
So you can
make profit in anything, can't you? That's the amazing thing, profit. But then that leads back to George's. George is always telling me that the one bad thing about the human race is that we're motivated by greed. But on the other hand, greed is the thing that motivates you to want to profit, and profit is usually the thing that motivates you to fix a problem. Usually.
Usually it is, and in the cases that we're talking about here, I think that much of the solution that we're going to have is best addressed by the profit motive. We're getting to a point where renewable power is less expensive than polluting power. And we're getting to a point where solving the problem of bad water is going to be much less expensive than living with or attempting to live with the problem of bad water. I mean, you pointed out before we came on the air that much of the world, perhaps most of the world, is in need of water.
Yeah.
And so if you go into Vietnam, for example, and I will tell you that I have a daughter-in-law who is Vietnamese. She and my son got married in Saigon, which is what the people in Saigon call it, not Ho Chi Minh City.
Yeah, right.
But they got married in Saigon, and my daughter was there at the time, and my daughter-in-law, who's I call her Ngok, because that's her first name, but her second name is Kim, and she's learned that it's easier for Americans to say Kim, so that's what she's. But Kim says that one of the things she pointed out to me was that the Mekong River was basically an open sewer. And that means that it's unavailable. And this is a serious problem. The Brahmaputra, my goodness, that one is legendary.
Yeah.
Did you know, by the way, about Reed's filter? My brother Reed's filter.
Yeah.
he invented a filter, and
I seem to remember hearing about it. Yeah.
the government of Bangladesh,
Yes.
they took one of these filters and they poured water into it, or they used it to filter water.
And he drank it.
And no, they tested the water and they found no bacteria in it.
Yeah.
Going through the filter, the bacteria were
Yeah.
Filtering bacteria out.
completely eliminated.
Wow.
And the interesting thing is, it's something that is so inexpensive that it could be made by any village potter,
Yeah.
and it can be cleaned by pushing water through it, clean water through it backwards, and it will last until it breaks. And it's made out of ceramic, and so there's hope for this for everybody
There's
except
hope.
Reed, who has the patents on it, but unfortunately,
It's only 100 or so years ago that you couldn't drink water in this country, and people used to drink beer instead of water because beer was the only safe liquid you could drink.
which means
in some
that
ways
prohibition might have been the smartest thing we could ever do, because it meant that people had to convert back to water again, and they realized how bad it was.
Yeah, I know. But the
sorry, it
problem,
didn't-
if you
didn't
can
work
fix
that
the
way.
problem in one country in a short period of time, you can fix it in any country. It's just a matter of willingness,
Absolutely.
amongst the people who can do something about it. And there's
Yes.
always people who can do something about these
Yes, and
things.
in
So
fact, we're going to be.
I'm very optimistic about the future.
I'm glad to hear it. And here I thought I was the only optimist around. aside from
I know
Tom.
you told me I was a pessimist, but I'm really a perennial optimist.
Okay, we have. Let's see. Where did we get to?
We were talking about the Edmonton
Edmonton.
waste to biofuel.
Yes, that's right. We
facility.
were okay.
And that's a
was-
perfect example, isn't it, of
Absolutely.
where there's a willingness to solve a problem. Hey, we solve it.
Well, and in many of these cases, the business of mining waste, what we're talking about is something that we were paying people to get rid of, and they were doing it badly, and all of a sudden it's a revenue source.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So this is
This is what they said, the takeaway from this Edmonton thing. We break down waste using heat, convert it into a gas that is as clean as natural gas.
yeah.
Then we convert the gas to liquid methanol. And all of that happens in 3 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
Then,
Ah.
then we are with, here we are with one of the last pieces of the puzzle to get us almost complete diversion from the landfill. We think 90% of our trash will now go to some higher purpose than being buried in the ground.
Yes.
And by the way, we're creating green jobs.
Yes.
We're
Although-
creating value and we're helping support innovation in Alberta and in the Canadian economy.
Now, I want to point out one other thing too, and that is if you're making methane and you're making methanol, you can go a step further and make that into plastics.
Absolutely.
Now, if you have plastics, then instead of releasing carbon dioxide into the air, you're putting
sequestering them.
you're sequestering them, and eventually maybe it'll go into a landfill, which means that you're reversing the business of coal mining. It's going to be kind of interesting. I know that's too simplistic, but it's going to be kind of interesting to see where all of this goes. Because Steve, as I think about it, what we are seeing more and more, and I know this is happening already in the schools, what we're seeing more and more is people taking degrees in which their major is ecological science and that sort of thing, where we're looking at the impacts of the things that we do on the planet, on the population of the planet. And I think this is going to be big business in the not very distant future. And by big business, I don't mean big corporations. I mean a lot of work will be going into this. A lot of our college students will be educated in this way, and important.
Yep, I
And
agree.
Today, I only have one news item for today because the internet was being about as flaky as I've seen it be. I did Google searches and so forth, and I would find links to things, click on them, and what I would get is this page is unavailable. And it just most of the places I tried to get to. So my news were shy today, and the only thing that I've got for today is an item about Google. Comes from MarketWatch. Google Incorporated is looking to make a deeper push into the billion-dollar U.S. energy market. This is not a billion-dollar market. I'm sorry, that really underestimates it.
I got it up there.
Yeah, by developing tools to deliver power more efficiently with the hope that a smart grid would be an improvement as solar and wind power become more prevalent. And this is something that you know, I think most people in this country really don't get the idea of a smart grid. But what do you think, Steve? I see you looking at that picture.
I'm looking at the Google article.
the Google article.
Is that where I'm supposed to be looking at?
It's
what's
up
up
there in the middle, but you can look backwards.
Well, it's,
if you want.
it's
I can't-
easier to see behind you.
Exactly, I can't read it up there. I mean,
People out in
as-
the world are looking at the one we see on the
Right.
Well, let's leave it on there so we don't have to watch Steve with his back turned, or me.
Well, it's obviously a step in the right direction. Going from dumb to smart is always a good thing. Always a good thing.
But if the only thing we've got is smart, then isn't that a little lopsided?
Here it is in a nutshell. Constant communication between the power network
Yeah.
and the homes and businesses that it serves. That's what a smart grid is.
Yeah,
Constant communication back and forth, and then making adjustments
right.
so that the demand and the supplier match as close as
Yep.
possible.
And you know, this is something that people don't really understand all that well, but what happens, you know, most people in the United States, I think, and I might be wrong, but I think most people think of the electric power that they buy as being a commodity, which costs a certain amount of money to manufacture and deliver, and so they pay something that's higher than that to get it. So if you pay 15 cents or 16 cents per kilowatt hour, obviously the electric company is spending 10 cents per kilowatt hour or whatever, getting that power and making a markup on it. That's not what's happening. It's far, far, far more complicated than that. In the middle of the night, when the nuclear power plants are going and the coal power plants are going, they cannot slow down, because if they do, then they won't be going fast enough to be able to meet peak power demands the next day. So they have to run all night.
Yeah.
And they've got power from wind turbines now, which sits there, you know, just coming onto the grid, and it's going to come on the grid, you know, for free as far as the people who own the wind turbines are concerned. And the result of that is in the middle of the night, they've got too much power. Now, if you've got too much power, something's going to happen. If you don't use it, it's going to burn something.
Yep.
And so you've got to use it. So the,
Or lose it. You've got to use it or lose it, like
Well,
everything.
It isn't even a case of losing it. If you
Well, you can
lose it,
just dump it
something
into the
bad
atmosphere,
happens.
dump it into the ocean.
In the old days, you know, the Kansas farm that was not grid connected, if they had a wind turbine,
Yeah.
they would have a resistance heater, and they would just use that power to run that heater, and the heater would just heat up the air around them,
Yeah.
outside,
Sure.
in order to get
Sure.
rid of the power without burning up the lines or
Right.
something.
Exactly.
And we have to do the same thing. So the result of that is there's a wholesale market which goes negative, where the power generating companies are paying people to take the power away so that they can keep their reactors going or their furnaces going or whatever during the night, so that when the factories open up in the morning,
Bingo.
people start going shopping, and so forth. The schools open up and everybody's busy. They've got the electric power to deliver.
So that when you turn your switch on, the light bulb comes on.
Exactly. Now, the power price goes up during the daytime, so the people who are making power can make money, even though they've been spending money during the night trying to get rid of power. Mm-hmm. And the lowest price I've seen reported for power was $100 negative per megawatt hour, which is negative 10 cents per kilowatt hour. The highest price I've seen for power was $11,000 per kilowatt hour when a coal burning plant unexpectedly went offline. And everybody was scrambling to try to supply the power that was needed by the grid, because otherwise there was going to be a failure of the grid. So they had to get things going as fast as they possibly could. The price went up to $11,000 for one sale within about 5 minutes. Within 15 minutes, it had gone down again to a little over $2,000. And it took a couple of hours to get the price back down below $200, which is still 20 cents per kilowatt hour. And so the grid as it goes is something which you're when you buy power during the daytime, you're buying something, and the power company is very likely, if it's just transmission, which is what Green Mountain Power is, the power company is very likely losing money.
It can very well be.
And what has to happen here is that if we have a smart grid, and it's operating economically. The grid the power company can charge you for the power that you're using at the time that you're using it, which means technically, if the power price goes below zero, you should be able to benefit from it. But if the power price goes to 60 cents per kilowatt hour, they should be allowed to charge you for that extra money.
Something like that must happen. It's inevitable. It's the only way it makes sense in the long term.
Right, but it means that your smart house with its smart appliances, you can say, hey, I never open this refrigerator during the day, or this freezer during the day, because I'm at work, the kids are at school, and so forth. So if the price of power goes above 15 cents per kilowatt hour, I
gotta shut my refrigerator off.
Shut this off, because I know that when it goes low again, it'll still be in condition to come back on, and everything will be.
But I think in this context, this Google article, the word smart really is a synonym for efficient. What it really means is you're turning the grid into an efficient entity.
Well, you're certainly doing that.
Yeah, energy comes in, energy is distributed in an efficient manner. And you don't lose it and throw it away.
That's right. That's exactly right.
You know, this all reminds me of, right at the beginning of this show, you showed a picture of CERN, the laboratory
We'll see it again.
just outside Geneva, Switzerland, where I've worked for pretty much my whole career. And the central object at CERN is a particle accelerator. Now, they've increased in size over the years. They used to be smaller when I was younger, and now they're enormous things. But however big they are, they all use a lot of electrical energy, a lot of power. And the power is all purchased from EDF, the Électricité de France, French electricity giant.
Yes.
And because they change the price of electricity from month to month, there are some months where it's just not efficient for CERN to operate. So the accelerator is turned off in the winter, I guess, or is it in the summer? I can't remember now. But one of those periods of the year,
might be both.
And it changes. It's changed with time because you know there didn't used to be air conditioning in Europe. Now it's everywhere. But they just turn the accelerator off, and that's in a way of being efficient and saving money because the cost of it's the same thing. And now Google's saying, let's formalize this process. Let's be really smart and make it efficient in a clever way rather than human intervention.
Now,
By the way, they'll make some money doing it.
They'll make money.
As always, as always.
In Germany, they have this thing called the virtual power plant. And a virtual power plant is basically a smart grid that is operated by a computer somewhere that will tell which power assets, generating assets to turn on, and which users to shut down, or vice versa, in order to have the grid balanced. And that virtual power plant is like a baseload power plant, except that it's better in the sense that you don't waste power coming out of it.
Yeah.
And so
It doesn't really exist, but it functions as if it does.
yeah, it's a computer basically that tells the wind turbine you've got to furl your blades because we've got too much power, or it tells the solar plant that it's got to distribute its, or it could be telling a chemical facility that's taking electricity, that can take electricity and use it to convert water into hydrogen and oxygen. Now it's time to turn on because we've got too much power. And that means you've got a commodity that is being produced, hydrogen, from power which formerly would have been wasted and possibly sold at a negative price. And this is just a matter of making everything far more efficient than it had been. And when you've got hydrogen, you can use it to make other things. You can catalyze it with carbon dioxide and turn it into plastics if you want, And so we're getting into a position where this is going to enhance our efficiency enormously. And it's one of those things that we can do. Now, as I'm looking at this, we're getting to the end of the hour because we started early, and we've got about a minute to go. So what we're going to do, I have introduced Steve Reucroft, Dr. Stephen Reucroft, as one of the people who was who wrote the paper announcing the existence of the Higgs boson. But Steve is going to tell us about other things that have much more to do with energy. And I want to say one of the things we're going to talk about is how to deal with nuclear waste. And that is going to be in the second part of the show. We're going to have to say goodbye to everybody because we're in terms of the first hour. BCTV broadcasts this show on Channel 10 and the other show usually on Channel 8. So there will probably be a special here that comes up that'll be the Steve Reucroft CERN special or whatever they decide to call it. And we are going to talk about that, and we're going to say goodbye to everybody for the first hour of the show, and then we'll just keep going.